Are you happy right now? That's a big question. Are you happy? Of course. Frank let out a silent sigh of relief upon hearing that. After a heartfelt last hug with his daughter, he turned to stroll towards the platform. The train darted away like a cheetah, with the scenery outside whizzing by. The views were stunning and beautiful, but Frank was stuck in a thought whirlwind, lost in his mind. After a 1,000-mile journey, he finally arrived in Denver, where his younger son lived. He quickly found the music hall where his son often performed. Spotting the poster outside, he excitedly asked a passerby to snap a photo, proudly declaring that the conductor on the poster was just as the band was rehearsing. Frank excitedly trotted into the hall, ready to watch his son's performance, only to realize the conductor wasn't Robert. It turned out Robert was just a low-key drummer. He rushed out upon seeing his dad, and his little exit didn't affect the whole performance one bit. Frank was thrilled to see his son, but also puzzled as to why the one conducting wasn't him. Robert felt a bit awkward. Even though he got the heads up from his sister earlier, he didn't expect Dad to crash the party. He casually fibbed, saying he also conducted. As the music rehearsal wrapped up, under Frank's persistent questioning, Robert finally spilled the beans about his real situation. He wasn't actually a subtitles. He was, in reality, nothing more than a little drummer. Frank had always held the belief that a son who had received higher music education ought not to remain so obscure. He wanted to offer to fund his son's further studies, but that wasn't what Robert wished for. Robert felt he had disappointed his father and wasted all the hard work his dad had invested in him. Frank didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure if Robert's choices were right or wrong, but he still wanted to spend a couple more days with his son. However, Robert declined, saying he had a gig in Europe tonight. Watching his younger son and elder daughter mimic the same expression, Frank felt he seemed a bit unwelcome. Perhaps an invisible barrier had formed between him and the kids, leaving Frank feeling helpless as he resolved to leave. Before leaving, Frank asked that question again. Upon hearing his son's answer, he decided to keep quiet. Though his heart ached, he still gave Robert a final farewell. Just as he was about to leave, he glanced back at his son, momentarily seeing the little Robert from years ago. Frank slyly left the prepared letter on the table as he walked out, and not long after, Robert quickly dialed Rosie, the youngest daughter Frank was headed to find. Frank never saw it coming that the surprise he was planning had already fizzled out, and it seemed the kids had some secrets they didn't want to share with him. And so, Frank embarked on his journey to Las Vegas, dialing his oldest son David's number along the way. But he tried multiple times, and still no one picked up. While switching modes of transport, Frank spotted a homeless guy in the underground passage, noticing he was about the same age as his younger son. Out of kindness, he gave the homeless man $10, but he wasn't grateful. Instead, he had his eyes on Frank's $100 bill, leading to that earlier scene. His life-saving meds got crushed, shattering Frank's travel plans. That kind of med is hard to get as rare spices. Considering Frank was at a loss for what to do, he called his late wife. Subtitles. He simply yearned to hear that familiar voice. His wife's voice immediately soothed his panicking and flustered mind. On the road to his youngest daughter's city, Frank took a bit of his crushed meds daily to ease his symptoms. Soon enough, he arrived in Las Vegas, greeted by a regular luxury car. Looks like Rosie was living the good life. Not only did she live in a posh apartment, she also booked her dad lunch at the top hotel. Rosie excitedly told Frank how she had decorated the room for him. Frank raised his camera to capture his daughter's joyful expressions, but then suddenly, Rosie's friend showed up uninvited. She seemed to be in a hurry, hoping Rosie could babysit. Seeing his daughter was in a bind, Frank jumped at the chance to help, even if it meant their lunch plans went south. But Frank couldn't resist that little munchkin, scooping him up and delighting in playful antics. That night, Frank accidentally overheard a voicemail message from his daughter, which left him completely bewildered. He puzzled over why his children always shared good news and avoided the bad. With his meds running low, he didn't want to add to Rosie's stress, so he mentioned his plan to head home the next day. Rosie wanted to persuade him to stay, but when push came to shove, she relented. They enjoyed a warm dinner together, and at that moment, Frank thought he saw a glimpse of young Rosie. Back then, they talked about everything, but now it felt like the kids were hiding something. With questions swelling in his mind, Frank finally asked why they only share things with him. They only wanted to share with Mom and not with him, the old man. Rosie explained that it was because Mom was easier to communicate with. She excelled at, whereas Frank was always one for sharing his opinions, and growing up, he had very high expectations for them, making it hard for them to live up to his ideals. They didn't want to let their hard-working dad down, so over time, they could only share happy news. After hearing this, Frank remarked that he had never required them to become truly outstanding individuals. Although he had held great expectations for David, David's current achievements clearly demonstrated that his efforts had not been in vain. Frank shared with Rosie that her big brother's works were displayed near their apartment. Each stroke of the painting marked a milestone, and he believed his son was living a fulfilling life, and Rosie nodded without saying more. As he had finished all his meds, Frank couldn't endure the long travel strain, so he could only take a flight back home quickly. He didn't want to go back home though, and Rosie nodded, not adding anything. With all his meds gone, Frank couldn't handle the exhausting long-distance travel, so he had to take a flight home fast. Before leaving, he gave his youngest daughter the last letter. This time, he didn't ask Rosie if she was happy anymore because he had already gotten the answer he needed. As he waved goodbye to his dad, Rosie felt a bit sad, yet there seemed to be something awaiting her and Amy to. However, on Frank's flight home, the plane unexpectedly hit turbulence from a storm, triggering his illness, and it brought back memories of family meals from when the kids were little.